Hi, I'm Dave Darlington. Welcome to my studio bass hit recording here in New York City. Today we're here to talk about the H bundle of plugins, 4 components: EQ, compression, delay, and reverb. I was fortunate enough to have a song by my friend Yoni Leviatan loaned to me so we could demonstrate it. And I'll take you through the plugins and what I'm doing. First, let me play a little bit of the chorus for you.
Days of change and sorrow, paving the way to streets of gold.
You can hear it's a pretty thick arrangement. We've got drums, bass, percussion, a bunch of keyboards, a bunch of guitars. We have some background vocals, and of course, the lead vocal, which is always the center of attention. So we need to carve out some sonic room for different things, but these are live instruments, so they're going to have roominess in the sounds, and we're going to use the H plugins to surgically get in there and create the sonic space we need, and then we're going to use the delay and reverb to create an ambience and a glue that knits the whole project together. Let me show you a little bit about how I set it up. These dark blue ones are all the drums. You can see I've got some EQ and some compressors on there, and then the entire drum kit is running through a bus with a compressor on the entire kit. We're treating the kit as one instrument. So we're fixing up a couple of individual mics, and then we're working on the kit as a whole. On the bass, I've got some HEQ. That's a little bit of what that looks like. These green guys are my keyboards. And I'm sending these 2 keyboards to an H delay right there, quarter note. And I'm sending this clavinet to an H-Reverb right there for some ambience. These light green ones are the guitars, the rhythm guitars, some sculpting there on the sound with some EQ, a little bit of a delay or a 16th note shadow on one of the guitars, and then an overall EQ on the guitar bus to take the whole family of guitars and sculpt it a little bit to sit it where it needs to be in the mix. This is the lead guitar solo, which I'm compressing fairly heavily at a pretty high ratio, and then I'm putting a little slap delay mixed in with my dry wet mixing signal at about 19%. Here's our background vocal chorus. We're giving them quite a bit of air at the top. They're singing the word ah, so we want to hear that nice air up on the top. And we're getting out all that rumble and boom of a layered thing where we have 8 mics in the same room, and all that low end gunk down there, we're just getting rid of that completely. That's being sent to a chamber. Here's H-Verb with a quick chamber dialed up, a little bit short, 2.5 seconds. And then the lead vocals are all being sent to a bus, which is EQ'd, and then compressed, and sent to an H-Verb here, which is a hall, and sent to its own delay, which is an 8th note. So let's go through the sounds one by one, and hopefully you'll be able to hear what these guys are doing. Sometimes I'm using them very subtly, and then other times I'm using them more dramatically, and I'll try to boost them up a little bit so you can really see what's going on. Let's turn off all the plugins on the drums and listen to what the raw recording of the drums sound like with just balance. It's a good drummer in a good room. He's got his toms nicely tuned and everything. It sounds pretty good. There's a little bit of a roominess to the sound, a little boominess down in the low mids, and then not quite as impactful as we might want for a rock song. So on the kick drum, this is my curve that I decided on the kick drum by listening to it. One of the great things about the HEQ, which is what this is the analyzer. This button turns it on and off to show it or not show it. So if I show it, this is the input, what the frequency response is on the input before the EQ. That's the yellow line. You can see we got a ton of energy way down in the bottom that's not really musical, below 20 hertz. This blue line is what's going on after the EQ. So you can leave them both on, it doesn't really hurt anything. And you can compare the difference between what you're actually doing with the EQ and how effective the EQ is being. So as you can see, we've got 5 bells and 2 filters. And there are 7 different models that you can choose in each in each part of the EQ. 5 analog ones from 3 vintage, 1 US and 2 UK, and 2 modern, US and UK, and then 2 digitals. If you think about what was going on in the old days in the UK in terms of consoles and in the United States in terms of outboard EQ, and then you think about what's going on nowadays in America and UK, you can kind of figure out where these models came from. I don't really care about that so much. What I really like is when you click through the different types of model, you see the bell change based on the way those particular units actually work. For example, let's use this lower midband here, the blue one, which I'm scooping out a lot of mud. As I scroll through these different models, you see the Q, how it changes. I'm not changing the amount of Q, but this is the way those hardware components react to different, the different models react in a different way. So what I do is find the frequency that I want to work on, and once I get that fixed and how much I want to attenuate or boost, then I scroll through the different models and see which one musically works in the way I want it to. In this case of Digital 1, there's a new filter which Waves actually invented called an asymmetrical bell filter. And what this does is it treats the frequencies above and below in a different manner. Instead of expanding or contracting symmetrical on either side, it tilts a little bit, which is great. It's really great on kick drums and floor toms because you can boost the low end. I'll show you how this works. This is the Q setting for that module, the purple module. If I put it all the way clockwise, it's focusing on the high frequencies and chopping off quickly the lower ones. So it's accenting the frequencies above and de-accenting the ones below. And the opposite happens if I go all the way counterclockwise. So in the case of a fundamentally low instrument like a kick drum or a tom-tom, I want that boost in the fundamental frequency, but then I don't want to add extra roominess and low mid mud. So the fact that slope is really dramatic going into the higher frequencies is super for this kind of application. Watch the analyzer show us in the low end how this is accenting the fundamental. There's 2 fundamental notes right here, an octave apart. And you can see the purple node is in the higher octave. But then right here, we're really getting rid of all that roominess and boomy sound very quickly. And that's because of the tilt. You see that curve changing like that? It has the opposite effect in vocals. If you want air on your vocals without the mid-range harshness, you tilt it the other way. Now you're boosting that satiny part of the sound and getting rid of that harsh bite. So Digital 1 has that great asymmetric bell filter, which is it's a real marvelous thing. So that's my EQ curve for the kick, and then I put a compressor on it. Here's H-Compressor. Really simple and elegant to use. You dial in your threshold and your ratio like any compressor. The meter will show you the input, the output, or the gain reduction. I like to watch how much I'm compressing. So if I crank the threshold up, I'm compressing more. The great thing is I have a mix control, which is a built-in parallel compressor. If I turn it all the way dry, I'm not compressing at all. If I turn it all the way left, it's only the compressed sound. So I can work on the sound with it all the way up. Now you hear that's really particularly squashed, especially the transients. But then I can dial it back. I can let some of that natural decay of the kick drum come through. Somewhere about there. And I have a makeup gain stage here at the output. There's 4 analog models, which are, again, color switches. They're modeled after the various types of analog compressors and the way they treat harmonic information. So once you get it compressed the way you want it, you can scroll through the colors. Let's put it all the way up so you can hear different amounts of boominess and resonance in the kick as I cycle through these different models. Less boomy. I kind of like that one, and then I mix it in about 40%. The attack and release controls work pretty much as you would expect. If If you have the attack a little bit slow, more of the transients come through, but it doesn't compress quite as quickly. And the release in the same way, you can have it hold on to the sound longer, or you can have it release quickly and be prepared for the next attack. Here's an interesting addition, is that you can sync your release to your host BPMs, or you can dial in your own BPMs if you want it to be different than your host. And then the release amounts are indicated in musical terms, for example, a 16th note or an 8th note. This is really, really pretty good on things like sequencers and echoes, if you want to have your echoes be somewhat compressed but be released for the next incident of an echo. It's kind of cool to have it BPM based. But in the case of a natural acoustic sound, I would probably stay with a millisecond based setting. The punch knob is the last knob that we see, and that has to do with allowing transients to come through even if your attack is set really quickly. So if you want to have a quick attack because you need that compressor to hold something in line, but you're losing some transients, you can dial them back in a little bit with the punch knob. You can hear that beater. You can hear that beater really, really getting through there. So if you ask if would you use two different H plugins on the same sound, of course I would. I would use an EQ and a compressor on many different sounds. Here's our snare drum. Here's my EQ curve. I'm taking a notch out, which was the ring in the snare, or possibly the mic, and I'm adding a little brightness. Let's hear where that ring is. Pretty easy to hear. You can boost it way up and then scroll through the frequencies. There it is. Once you find it, just dial it back out. You notice below the frequency graph, there's a keyboard. A lot of producers and musicians think in musical terms. They're not thinking engineer-wise in frequency terms. So the guitar player might say, man, whenever I hit my A string, it's too resonant and too boomy. So you can go right to that A right there and dial in on his problem area and communicate with your musicians and your producers in real musical terms. So that's a bonus of having that keyboard under there, just to give you another way of thinking of the same fundamental processes. So here we have our analog stage. You can also model different analog settings in the same way as the EQ nodes themselves, but this is the output stage. So it's modeling the output amps of the different older EQs and the harmonic distortion that might inject into an overall sound. And you also have a mix control of that. You can control the distortion up to 10 times the amount of the original model, which can get very interesting. You don't hear it so much on a snare drum. But you can really overdrive things that way. Or you can just turn it off and not model the output, but model the various analog EQ stages. Then I would also compress the snare drum, same way as I did the bass drum. Maybe just dial in a little bit. Just dial in a little bit to give it some smack. A little bit of you see I have the limiter button engaged here. That makes it 100 to 1 or a brick wall compressor. So I'm actually hitting the compressor pretty hard, but I don't have that much of it in the sound, only about 30%. On the overhead mics, I'm just doing a little cleaning on the high-pass filter, getting out some of that dirt. If we look at the analyzer, since those mics are up high off the cymbals, they're getting a lot of room ambience, which really can tend to build up down there below 50. It's just noise that you don't really need in your mix. It doesn't hurt the cymbals in any way to take that out, but look how much of it I'm removing on the graph. The difference between the input yellow and the output blue. And again, you can scroll through the various models and you'll see the knee of the roll-off change. So I do that by ear. I just find the one I like and then I go with it. And I'm boosting a little bit of the upper end. You can see from the graph where the fundamental high-end energy is and use that as your starting point for a boost. I am overdriving the channel a little bit, so and the trim is telling me that I'm overdriving by 0.8 dB, so if I just hit that, it comes down. Now I'm not clipping anymore. All the drums are running through this drum sub, which is really good if you need to EQ your overall set. I found that the recording was really pretty good, so once I cleaned up the kick and snare and the overheads, sounded great to me. So I'm just recompressing the entire kit as a single instrument, thinking of the drum kit as an instrument, not a bunch of separate microphones.
These are the days of change and sorrow, paving the way to streets of gold.
So we haven't fundamentally changed the tone of the drums, but we've cleaned them up and made them much more legible and more impactful, and they're really cutting through all those guitars and things. On the bass, I'm EQing, taking out a little mud, adding a little top end where the fingers are, and then rolling off a little bit of the noise that might come from the slapping against the frets.
These are the days of change and sorrow, paving the way.
And again, the analyzer was super helpful to me in finding out where those points were that I needed to work on. I'm going to boost this upper mid-range band so you really hear the fingers. You can see from the graph where that point is. It makes your job a lot easier. Over here on the keyboards, I'm not doing any EQing because these are digital keyboards, but I am using a delay to give these guys some movement in the mix. Let's see what the delay is. It's a quarter note. Okay, so I'm killing two birds with one stone here. We have a sequencer that's sequencing in quarter notes. So I put a quarter note delay on top so that the delay is happening right on top of the previous note, actually making a chord. It's building up all the notes as he plays them, and they sustain in a chord. The same delay works great on the lead sound as a more soaring anthemic treatment. So that's exaggerated. Let me pull that back down. So that delay is really helping them glue in without getting in the way because it's right in time to the BPM of the song. There's still plenty of room for all the other instruments to be heard. Okay, moving on down the line, we have a clavinet here, which I felt was a little bit dry. So I added a little bit of H-Reverb. Let's see where we can find where it's playing. Here we go. I'll exaggerate. It's actually a pretty long space, but I don't have it up that loud in the mix. So here's the first time we've taken a look at H-Reverb, and it comes up in what they call collapse mode, which is just your basic parameters, the things you need to get to quickly to set it how you might want it. And I'll go through what this graphic is showing us here. Of course, this big triangle is our decay. In this case, it's a very linear decay, but there's a break point here, which they call a crossover point, where you can exaggerate the sustain part or the decay part. So you can have a very long sustain followed by a quick decay. Let's see if I can draw that in quickly. So it cuts off very rapidly after 2 seconds. Actually, what we're hearing is output echoes. You hear it close off real quick like that. That's what this breakpoint does. So I find that very helpful in terms of not having my tails being too long and smearing everything together if I don't need that. So I use this quite a bit. It often comes up almost linear, but I like to boost the verb. You get the real effect of the verb without the extra tail. These white indicators here show us the early reflections, the slaps off the side of the room, and those are the parameters for those are available in the extended window, the expanded window. So we'll get into those in a minute. We also have a pre-delay, which moves the reverb off of the main input sound by milliseconds. So it can be very dramatic. Hear that delay. Usually reverbs, you want them to separate a little bit from the main sound, but not crazy, so they don't sound completely distinct. So I like something around 30 or 40. The buildup is the actual attack of the reverb, similar to this a crossing point here. It's really like you have an ADSR, almost like a synthesizer on your verb, so you can have it build up slowly. Let's really exaggerate that and see what we hear. Hear it growing? Because I'm having a very slow attack. That can be great to make some wild effects in like EDM and stuff. You can have the reverb come almost out of nowhere. That's the buildup, which I think of as attack. And then the size of the space is how far apart these early reflections are. The farther apart they are, the more you get a sense of larger space. You can control the balance between the early reflections. This is only early reflections. I'm going to have to send a little more on this so we can hear it better. So that's only the basement sounds, the sounds of the walls of the basement banging back and forth. And if we turn it all the way the other way, let me go back to my original ambience. We turn it all the way the other way, we only have the tail. With no slapping of the hard cement walls in our room. So we don't really get a sense of room that way, but we get a sense of ambience with a long tail. And, you know, somewhere in between is probably the best and right setting. We also have input echoes, which gives us another iteration of my input sound and as many times as we want. And we have output echoes, which echo the outputs of the verb. It layers the tail on top of itself, which makes it even more diffuse and more glued together. And there, I'll show you some controls for that later when we get down into the vocals, when we expand the window. That was a quick overview of H-Reverb. What else is going on? Here's some guitars. These are the rhythm guitars. So this is our main power guitar. Oh no, this is our arpeggio. This is our main arpeggio guitar. I'm just scooping out some dirt in the bottom, and I'm adding a little bit of 400 here, kind of that Beatle guitar sound, that low mid, to really help me fill up, because it's a guitar-based song, so I want this to be one of the stars. You can see how much I'm filtering out the dirt, and you can see the fundamental frequencies that I'm accenting down here in the lower mids. This guitar is doing this. That's our rhythm guy. I just put a little slap on him, a little 16th note slap. You can see I dial it in, and if you turn the delay knob, you'll see that it's set musically because I'm locking it to my host BPMs. I can dial in my own BPM number, or I can do it in milliseconds. But host is very easy because I know I want it to be rhythmic in this case. I just want to put a little shadow on him. So I'll show you via the dry wet knob. Did it. But I don't want to hear it that much. I just want a little bit. Now he doesn't sound like he's in a home studio. He sounds like he's in a big stage. Let's see where we are so far with our song.
These are the days of change and sorrow.
So everything's fitting together pretty well. We've scooped out a lot of problematic frequencies with our EQ, and we've compressed some things to give them more impact, but we haven't sucked the life out of them. We have a pretty big, full, rich sounding band. We have to add our guitar solo, which is here. Of course, we're going to compress that so it really sails above everybody. Let's see where that comes in. That's right here. Solo it. So you can see I'm compressing that pretty hard because I want it to be even. I want to get more sustained, like a stomp box compressor. And I'm modeling it on analog model number 1, and I'm also mixing it in pretty dramatically, almost 80%, might even go higher. As far as ambience for that guy, he's already got a little bit of spring reverb in his sound, so I didn't really need any more reverb, but I needed a delay. I've already used a quarter note on my synths. I'll probably use that on my vocals. I needed a different musical amount, a dotted eighth, to fit in between, so we hear those echoes in between where other guys are playing. That's going to fit in between our basic 4/4 beat. So you'll be able to, you actually want to hear this echo. In this case, we want to hear the effect. You hear the trail offs at the end, very dramatic. And the great thing about H delay is these filters. I'm high passing at 147, low passing at 3K, so I don't have a lot of extra tape noise and rumble. I got a nice mid-range echo that's very warm and sits just right in the mix. On to the background vocals. Okay, so I'm EQing them a little bit. Let's hear it without the EQ. It's not bad. It's a good mic, obviously, but we need this to sit in. We've got 5 or 6 guitars. We've got keyboards. We got a bass, a loud drum kit. We only need frequencies that aren't in the other instruments so that we can actually hear them without them being too loud. So I'm scooping out a little bit of middle, cleaning out all that ugly bottom, and I'm really boosting the high end up here. It sounds too much in solo, but in the mix, your ear tells you that there's background vocal singing are there because we hear that air up on the voice. As far as an ambience treatment for them, I thought maybe a 60s kind of a echo chamber thing would be good. So I opened up H-Reverb and I went to my presets, and there's all kinds of chambers here. There's a default chamber, and there's also a bunch of stuff made by great engineers all around the world. So pick a preset, dial in the setting that you might want in terms of time, whether your tempo is quick or slow, and off we go. Let's hear the verb. It sounds like EMI Abbey Road Studios. They're sending it down into the echo chamber and miking it back up. It's really great. And it also makes them feel bigger in the mix, even though they're not any louder, because we have that mid-range kind of a cement echo chamber vibe going on with them. Just great. I didn't really have to tweak any presets at all. I just set my length how I wanted it, and off we went. In the lead vocal, of course, we're EQing. Solo this guy. So yeah, I'm notching out a problematic frequency here at 2500.
These are the days of change and sad.
We've got a rogue playing somewhere. Oh.
These are the days of change and sorrow, paving the way.
So that's a pretty ugly frequency, which I found by scanning.
These are the
And you can also see it in the yellow analyzer.
These are the days of change and sorrow.
So we just take it right out. Now on the high end, here's a good example of a use of our asymmetrical bell filter. In this case, I don't want these harsh upper mids. I want I want to get rid of them quickly, but I want to add more above where my frequency point is, so up in the air band. And then I'm just rolling off a little bit of his sibilants, S's and T's up here, 18K, not really that audible. So that's the EQ. Then I'm compressing and parallel. I'm not squashing the life out of him, but I'm mixing the compression.
These are the days of change.
So I'm using the compressor rather strongly, 6 dBs even on a normal vocal level, but I'm dialing it into his uncompressed sound. So he has life and body and emotion, but I also have that core that's going to cut through the mix. We got a lot of stuff going on in this mix.
These are the days of change and sorrow, paving the way.
As you can hear. As far as ambience, I actually put an eighth note on the bass, I put an eighth note on the vocal, and I'm rolling off a lot of the bottom of the echo. So the echo is actually fairly bright. Actually a bell in the middle, upper middle. Let's hear what that sounds like.
These are the days of change and
It's almost a little bit of a radio tone to the voice, but that echo helps it cut through and also allows you to actually hear the echo, like a slap echo, or like an Elvis type echo.
These are the days of change and sorrow.
In terms of verb, I pulled up a hall.
These are the days of change and sorrow.
Now this is where we can get in a little bit into the guts of H-Reverb. There's so many more parameters down here that you can fool around with. Let's just go in order here. This module here is a representation with knobs of what this graphic thing is showing us. You can see if I move the time where the crossover point is, the gain of the crossover point, and the density this is the actual volume of the echo tail. As I was saying earlier, we have input echoes. As I turn them on, you can see discrete means how clear are they one from the other. I think of it like a filter. Less discrete means they're more covered sounding and not so audible. More discrete means they're more independent. And then how much they blur into the tail. You have some pull down choices here in terms of how many and where they are in terms of the music and how they build up. There's so many choices that it's hard to settle on one because they all sound pretty good, and different music requires different treatment, so you can just go for it and be experimental. The input echoes are working on the input sound, so instead of saying these once, he's saying these, but the second and third these are softer than the initial one, of course. What that just does is it blurs the input to the echo. A lot of engineers would put an echo before their reverb send in the analog days because it was a trick to make the reverb blend in better with the mix, but we have it right here already up. So all you do is dial in the amount and off you go. Then there's output echoes, which is different because these are echoing the tails. It's taking the tail and layering it on top of each other by as much or as little as you say. The size would be the time in between. The amount would be the volume. And tone is self-explanatory, bright or dark. And you toggle the input and output echoes on here, and they're represented on the graph up there. Pretty simple. Then we have our compression module here, which has 3 modes, duck, comp, and DS. Comp is the simplest one. It's working on the output, so it's compressing the output of the verb to hold it in place and maybe keep it sustaining a little bit longer. It's as if you strapped a compressor after your reverb return. And the threshold, of course, will determine what level it kicks in at. And the recovery is like a release time. How much time does it take before it's ready to accept the next input? Ducking is input-dependent compression, like any ducking would be. So it's ducking the tails down when it senses an input and letting them release when the input stops. Let's see if we can hear that.
These are the days of change. These are the days of change and sorrow, paving.
You can hear it. I put it on very dramatically with a quick recovery and a super low threshold, so you can hear as soon as he stops, the reverb comes up. This is extreme.
These are the days.
You won't want it to do that, but you might want to get it out of the way of the vocal itself.
These are the days of change and sorrow, paving the
So you only are hearing it in the spaces. It's one technique to have a long reverb without taking up too much room. And finally, the de-esser works. It works on the reverb, but only when the input has high frequency information like S's and T's and stuff. So you can keep your vocal EQ'd nice and clear and air on the top without worrying about if your tails of your reverb are going to have that spitting sound.
These are the days of change.
You can hear there's not so much in the tail now. This is great on ballads where there's a lot of time between the words and the singer might say something with a really strong S. You don't want to be distracted from the music with that S ricocheting around in your long reverb tail. So this will keep the tail nice and warm, but still audible.
These are the days of change and sorrow.
So I really like the de-esser. I find that extremely useful in treating my reverb. I'm able to add more reverb without it being distracting. Let's see. Here's our early reflection settings. Just the graphic displays of the different types of early reflections and what they might do. And there's 10 different choices there, and you have to, of course, have the mix set so that some of them are on if you want to see them. It changes the shape of the basement, as I like to think of it. Below that, we have the EQ section, but just a basic EQ, 4-band EQ, two shelves and 2 bells, which you can sculpt the return. I have a really big boost at kind of low mids just to give it a warmth because his voice is cutting very well. So I needed to build up a little warmth down in the lower end without EQing his voice down there. So I just want the ambience to have that warmth down there. That's my reverb setting. And of course, you have gain and frequency and Q for the 2 bells. Let's see, over here, with this we call the modulation area. So we have damping, which is quite common on most reverbs. This is the frequency on the x-axis and the time on the y-axis. So the 0 point means that whatever time we have set here, those frequencies would decay at that time, 3.24 in this case. Now the high frequencies above 4K are decaying quicker, and we can actually make the low frequencies decay longer. Let's see if we can hear that.
These are the days.
Let's make it a little bit longer so we can.
These are the days.
You hear the lows.
These are the days of change.
A much darker sound
These are,
as opposed to this, which would be a much brighter sound.
these are the days.
So that's extreme examples of what you might use this for. You could use that as a special effect, or you might just want to warm up your whole thing and get rid of some of that sizzly part of the tail. That's what the damping is for. We can also hear that. They give us a little test button here. This is interesting. They call it waves noise, which is not pink noise, not white noise, but a certain selection of frequencies designed to show off the reverb, kind of like a snare sound, really. So that's if you want to hear without running your song, if you want to hear what the dampening might be doing. That's really obvious what it's doing there, right? And here we have the boost in the highs. So that gives you a really oral indication of what's going on, and then you have to interpolate that into what it would be doing on your program material. There's also an envelope for the reverb with 2 points, attack and release. Let's see. These are resonant filters. Let's put the mix all the way up. Yeah, we can hear it. Kind of a mid-range filter, but the frequency is changing over time. Kind of a one-shot LFO. You can turn it upside down too. Well, actually, that was flipped. That's a mid-band. The third modulation tool is an LFO, just an oscillator. That can do some wild effects. Let's see. I think we can make it bigger. Oh, here's the rate. Okay. Pretty cool. You can also sync it to the BPM. So I wouldn't use that on a vocal, but I might use it on a clap or a snare or a kick bomb in an EDM record as I go off into my breakdown. It might be a fantastic effect. Then we also have other modulation on the inputs and outputs. AM modulation is volume, like a tremolo. This is working on the input side. So if you have like a sine, you could really hear it with a sine wave or a synth or a power chord or something. Let's say we had a power chord to go into the reverb. We could make that power chord have amplitude modulation, gang, 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 as opposed to gang.
These are the days.
Let's see. Hard to hear, but you hear the frequency modulation, which is on the output side. That's that filtering effect that we're getting now, that phasing, because the frequency of the output is being modulated with an LFO. That you can clearly hear. So that's program dependent. You know, you have to choose that wisely on what you're using it on. It might be good on a more sustained kind of a thing, maybe a Rhodes or an organ, something like that. Something that has a long sound that you can hear it moving over time, as opposed to a short sound or a vocal, which is changing quite rapidly. And finally, here in the global output section, we have drive, which is driving the amplifier stage of the reverb, kind of modeled after old reverbs where you could overdrive them and actually go into the red, and they would add harmonic distortion. And there's an analog model similar to the NLS console modeling. It's just like you're running it through the filters and op amps of an older analog reverb. And then we have a digital model, which actually is a bit reducer. You see 12-bit and 8-bit, which makes it more like those old video game kind of reverbs. It's much more grainy and less smooth. So that would be good as a special effect. And that's pretty much gone through everything. There's one other thing I wanted to show you in the EQ section, which I forgot. Let's go back to a stereo EQ here. Okay, this is my guitar bus. So we have guitars panned around different ways, and now we're EQing the whole bus. So we have a left and a right component. In its stereo instantiation of the plugin, we have an extra mode section, which you don't have in the mono. Let me find a mono. Open it up simultaneously. There, we can see. So you see here in the stereo area is extra stuff that we don't have in the mono. That's because this little chain means they're linked. The left and right is linked. If I move one of the nodal points, both sides are moving together. If I unlink them, then I'm only doing the side that's highlighted. So in this case, let's take some mids out of the left side, and then let's boost them up on the right side. So you can see I'm doing two completely different, it's like having two EQ modules in one preset working on the same sound. So for example, a piano on the left side where the left hand is, if you've mic'd it with a stereo pair in some configuration, you might want to take some tubbiness out of the left hand and leave the right hand plain. And you might want to accentuate the melodic parts of the right hand, but not so much in the left hand. So that would be a good example. Or an acoustic guitar where you've mic'd the hole and the neck. Sometimes you might want to take some of that clickiness off the neck side without hurting the warmth of the box side. So that would be a really good example of when I would use the stereo EQ separated, split left and right. There's one more mode here called MS, if you know what mid-side is. Mid-side is when you have a middle mic, and then you have a figure 8 mic with the left and right information, which is mono, but then you bring it up in stereo, flip one side. So the more of the out-of-phase middle information that you include makes the image wider. in this case of the EQ, what it means is one side is affecting the side elements of your program, and the other side is affecting the middle. So, for example, let's say let's flatten it out and go to mid side. Let's say in the middle we wanted to bring our voice up like that and get some boominess out of this, an extra too much stuff in the middle, something like that, maybe a bell. But then on the sides, we might want to bring up those cymbals or those background vocalists. So you can treat the mids and sides completely differently. It's really good for mastering if you need to do some stuff to the outer portion of the sound field and you don't want to affect the middle portion, or vice versa. If you want to affect the middle portion without affecting the outer portion, that's when you would use the mid side environment. So the basic premise of the H bundle is that we have the best of both worlds. We've got all these great analog modules. We can dial in the different tone colors and stuff that are modeled after the old reverbs and stuff, but we have all the good workflow elements of our modern digital world, where you can just grab a nodal point and fix it, and you can see great graphic representations of stuff that you never used to see in the analog world. And you can save your settings. You can go to the presets that some of the world's best engineers have made for you. So they're elegant, they're extremely potent. You can really get under the hood and dig in if you want to get your hands dirty, but you don't have to. You can just grab them and go, dial up a preset, and it's my go-to toolbox. I really wouldn't want to mix without them.